So, some Brit who was in the Donetsk, where the great battle is taking place even as we speak, well, this Brit, went back to Great Britain or wherever, and he gave some interviews and such, and he said that he was surprised by the intensity of the conflict. I'm sorry. I just find it really, really funny when these NATO troops, or officers or whatever, show up in Ukraine and they get a taste of what real war is like. Because the fact is that Western troops have never been at war. Never. No. What they have carried out are police actions after their superior air power has delivered superior firepower on these rinky-dink little Middle Eastern countries. And so these soldiers just roll in and they pretend it's combat, man. I mean, I don't know anything about combat. I've never been in combat. I've never been part of the military. But I'm here in Ukraine and I've gotten an education right quick. You know what I'm saying? And so what I find really funny is that, I find it funny and tragic and actually very dangerous, which is basically this. The American side, the NATO side, the Western Europeans, they're not ready for a war. And in fact, if they go up against anybody half decent, they're going to be annihilated. I mean, they really are. And I hope that somebody in the Pentagon recognizes this. I suspect that some do. But if you start looking at every facet of warfare, you realize that the United States and its Western allies are so deficient in every single category that they could not survive a war with a peer, an actual war with a peer. Because you got to keep in mind, the Russians keep saying that this conflict in Ukraine is a special military operation. And they're dead right. It's not a war. It's a special military operation. And what's the distinction? It seems like a distinction without a difference. It actually is very, very different because the Russians are taking pains not to hurt the civilian population. They are taking pains to look after the country, even as they try to invade it and neutralize the armed forces of Ukraine. It's kind of like, when you have a kid brother and he's annoying you and you start, beating him up, quote unquote, right? You're beating him up, but you're not really going whole hog on him, right? Because he's your kid brother. He's an annoying little shit, but you don't want to hurt him, really hurt him. Huh? So you're kind of like holding back and not quite really just pounding. If you were some random guy that you meet outside the club who says some words your way, that's a whole different ball of wax, right? That guy, he's toast. Your kid brother, you're really not going to go whole hog. I mean, you're going to hurt him. You're going to bloody his nose, maybe. Maybe really hurt him if he just gets a little bit too uppity. But you're not going to try to destroy him. And that's the difference between a special military operation and a war. The Russians in eastern Ukraine, they are in all effects carrying out a war because they are trying deliberately to annihilate the Ukrainian armed forces. In the rest of the country, no. In the middle of the country, in cities like Cherkasy and Dnipropetrovsk, out west in Lviv and whatnot, no. They're hitting military targets, but they're not trying to destroy the country. They're not trying to win a war. Insofar as eastern Ukraine, where the combat is going on now, yes, they are doing that. And that British soldier that I quoted, he got a taste of it. And it freaked him out, as it should freak anybody in the Pentagon. Because you see, if you look at these different facets of American and Western warfare, they are all deficient. I mean, what are those elements? Well, first of all, you need political leadership, obviously. Political leadership, and then military leadership. Military leadership, and then you need the troops, the actual men who are going to do the fighting. They have to be tip-top, right? Not just trained, not just equipped, but mentally, psychologically ready for industrialized warfare. Because it's a huge shock, believe me. It is a huge shock when all of a sudden you're in industrial warfare. It is like nothing, and very little training comes close to it, okay? And the fourth issue is equipment, the weapons you use, the aircraft, and all the rest of it. And if you start going through these four categories of things that you need to go to war, to successfully wage war, you realize that the West, the United States, NATO, call it what you will, does not have what it takes to successfully carry out a war. I'm sorry about the air raid sirens. There's nothing I can do about it. Insofar as their political leadership, well, do we need, they're morons. First of all, we have a senile president and we have buffoons as prime ministers of the other countries. Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, Boris Johnson, Justin Trudeau. Between all of them, you can't make even one decent person, let alone one decent leader, right? So forget about the leadership, but even so, insofar as the West is concerned, they don't understand the notion of negotiation. They don't understand how to negotiate, how diplomacy is so crucial. Hang on just a second. Let me shut the window here. Sorry about that. It's the goddamn air raid sirens. They come at the most inopportune times. There's nothing I can do about it, and it's pointless. See, they go off, right? Oh, what am I going to do? Hide? Where? And where's the missile coming? Is it going to hit me? Is it going to hit somebody else? It's kind of pointless. And a lot of times, the air raid siren comes after you hear the explosions going off wherever. They're far away from here. They're like, I don't know, between 3 and 10 kilometers away. So it's no big deal. But the thing is, it's just annoying, and I do the videos and stuff. It just spoils my mood. Okay. Let me go zen and go back to what I say. As I was saying, there are 4 issues that the Western armies need. They need political leadership, military leadership, the troops themselves, and their equipment, their weapons and logistical gear and all the rest of it. Now, if you go through them, the political leadership, they don't understand how to negotiate. They don't understand that war is merely an extension of politics and that you can continue to be negotiating even as you're at war with somebody. And that the whole point of conflict is to get your way. And you can get your way not just through conflict, military conflict. You can get it through diplomacy. And sometimes, by giving up something that is trivial to you, you can get something that is very important to you. Giving up something trivial to you that is important for your counterpart, and their counterpart gives up something that's trivial to them but important to you, and everybody happy. No military conflict, no troops on the ground, right? The United States doesn't understand that. The United States only understands bullying tactics, hitting people. And the worst part is the way that the Americans hit. The American hits you, while he's crying out in pain. It's the truth. Anyway, the political leadership in the United States, all they know is straight ahead, full steam ahead, war, war, war. The military leadership, they're incompetence. They are morons. They are incompetence. And the fact is that the entire officer corps of the Western armies, the whole thing is designed to advance the career of suck-ups, of people with no initiative, of no independent judgment. They pretend that they train people to have independent judgment, but it's a lie, because the people who rise are the people who are compliant, who only say the approved doctrine and who never question the approved doctrine. Yesterday, I had like a Twitter spat with a guy called Barry McCaffrey. This Barry McCaffrey imbecile is some just idiot 4-star general. And you know why I had a Twitter spat with him? Because he posted video, right? It's really fucking funny, man. He posted video of these jets fighting and shooting one another and all kinds of acrobatics in the air, combat in the air. And, I have, never been in combat myself, and I don't even play video games. But even I could tell, hey, that's video game footage. It's not real. And it wasn't. You posted footage from a video game and claiming how the Ukrainians were blowing the Russians out of the sky. And this is a 4-star general, saying this idiocy. And that's the kind of imbecility that you have at the Pentagon. And because you do. We all know that you do. At the Pentagon, the CIA, the State Department, you have morons in the military diplomatic corps, in the intelligence community. They're fools because they've been picked because they are politically loyal. This is late stage Brezhnev era Soviet Union stuff that's going on in the West. In the vaunted democracies that are supposed to be so meritocratic, you have late stage Brezhnev social cancer going on in the leadership, in the political leadership, and in the military intelligence diplomatic leadership. Now, what about the gear? Well, I did a video the other day about gear. The gear of the West, well, it's garbage, see? I mean, here in Ukraine, they have told, the Zelensky regime has told the soldiers not to complain on social media about the foreign weapons. They're complaining about it because they think it's garbage. These guys are actually fighting. Whatever you might think of the Ukrainian army, whatever you might think of the Zelensky regime or the causes of the conflict, these guys are actually at war, fighting every day. They need decent equipment. And the famous javelins and stingers and these various weapons of various sorts, they say that they're garbage on social media to the point that the Zelensky regime had to prohibit this. What does that tell you? Do you need any more? And like I said, it's basically the F-35, the be-all, end-all of NATO aviation, right? It spends between a quarter and a third of its time grounded because the software doesn't work. It's garbage, yeah? Because the whole point of all of that weaponry is to make money for the military-industrial complex. It's not to have actual weapons that are good at war. Now, what about the troops? Well, here's the tragic bit. See, the troops in the West, I personally, and I think I'm not alone in thinking this, I think a lot of people think the same thing. I think that the current troops in the West, in the United States, NATO, the Western European allies, and so forth, they are weakling little losers. They are arrogant shitheads who think, America number one, yeah, we're so tough. I've had a few Twitter spats with some of these imbeciles. They really are. They're so arrogant. And the problem is the First Gulf War. Because the First Gulf War, they went up against an army that was numerically fairly large, but in terms of quality was lacking, and certainly didn't have the defenses necessary to counter the U.S.'s real power. The U.S.'s real power is air power. And so Saddam Hussein's army back in 91 for Desert Storm didn't have what it took to protect itself against American air power. And even then, the Americans didn't have an easy go of it. They did win, but it wasn't that, easy. But mythologically, in the memory, it's become, it was a cakewalk because we're so superior. No, you're not so superior. You got lucky. And in every war that the West has gotten involved in since then, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq again, all of these wars, they are fighting people who are technologically behind the Americans and numerically behind the Americans. See? I mean, they're basically fighting weaklings. See, I'm a 54-year-old man. I weigh a couple hundred pounds. Unfortunately, I'm trying to lose some weight. I'm about 6 feet, right? If I come up against some guy who's, 4'6", I can probably beat him up just by virtue of me being bigger, okay? Not because I'm a better fighter. I'm just bigger. I'll just throw my giant pot belly on him and probably smother the poor guy to death, right? And then what if I start walking around saying, oh yeah, I'm so tough, man. I beat up this guy, this little 4'6" fellow, right? Who weighs maybe 80 pounds. Oh yeah, I beat him. You see? You see the comparison? And so American soldiers, they have been imbued, and it comes from their officer class, by the way. They've been imbued with this notion that they are invincible, that they're so much more powerful than anybody else. And then what happens is that they come across a real fight, and they all of a sudden find themselves on the receiving end of what the United States and the Western allies have been doing, which is using overwhelming firepower against a much weaker opponent, and then waltzing in, mopping up. This British guy that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that's what happened to him. He thought that it was going to be another cakewalk. It was going to be a Russian safari. He'd get to kill some Russians. It'd be so easy. And the Russians, well, they thought different. And they had the muscle to prove their point. A lot of these mercenaries, these Western mercenaries, I mean, a lot of them have combat experience, or what they claim to be combat experience, which is really just policing action in the Middle East against far weaker opponents. And they claim to have military experience, and so they come to Ukraine, and then they get a real military experience. They get the shit kicked out of them. And a lot of them die, and the ones who survive run home to mama in the West, like little pussy-ass bitches. If you're in the West, you better know that you don't have what it takes to win a war. Bottom line. You don't have the political leadership, the military leadership, you don't have the gear, and you don't have the men. Because the men in the West are weak and soft and pathetic. Every single foreign soldier who comes here winds up running away. All of them. They'll run away or they die. One or the other. None of them stand and fight. Because I think that what's happened is that in the West is so weak, so corrupt, so pathetic, that they can't field an army. And I'm going to be amused if I ever see them try to field an army, because it's going to get annihilated if it faces a peer. Russia is a peer. China is a peer. I mean, like it or not. And if you're in the American Armed Forces or the European Armed Forces, you better get ready to die if your country is dumb enough to get involved in a war with either one of those two countries. Because that's exactly what's going to happen. And it'll be the fault of your political leadership, your military leadership, your crap gear that doesn't work. And most of all, it'll be your fault because you've grown up weak and you expect that that is how life should be.